Anyway, despite the Attorney General's timetable, we're talking about 2 weeks from now, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jerry Nadler of New York, is sticking to his demand the report be delivered in its full by next Tuesday, of the April 2nd. And Nadler's also taking issue with Barr's redaction, saying rather than expend valuable time and resources trying to keep certain portions of this report from the Congress, he, that would be Barr, should work with us to request a court order to release any and all grand jury information to the House Judiciary Committee, as has occurred in every similar investigation in the past. Congressman Cicilline, here's the question. We're all going to look at this report in 2 weeks, and if we see a lot of black, covered over whole pages, I mean, it'll be all over the nightly news, all over this program. It won't look like transparency. It'll look like cover-up.
Right. Well, I mean, don't forget, Mr. Barr, it already looks like cover-up. I mean, Mr. Barr gives us 4 parts of a partial statements of a 400-page document in an effort to shape the narrative. And he auditioned for this job by basically arguing a president can't be charged with obstruction because he's in charge of the Department of Justice. And then he delivers on that promise in 48 hours. So there's already a lot of suspicion about this. And if a report is released that's completely redacted, I think the American people will not stand for it. Certainly Congress won't. We need the full report disclosed immediately to us so we can begin our work. And then we'll work with the Attorney General to be sure that we have access to the grand jury proceedings and to redact whatever is not appropriate released to the public. But we have the ability to see classified materials and materials that involve sources and methods. We can do that in a classified setting. Members of Congress ought to see this full report immediately, and we're going to fight hard to make sure that happens.
Well, here's the president late today reacting to the news from Barr on the release of Mueller's report.
The Attorney General said today that he intends to release the Mueller report in full to Congress and the public. Do you agree with that decision, and do you want the White House to take a look over it for privilege?
Well, I have great confidence in the Attorney General, and if that's what he'd like to do, I have nothing to hide. This was a hoax. This was a witch hunt. I have absolutely nothing to hide, and I think a lot of things are coming out with respect to the other side. But I have a lot of confidence in the Attorney General.
Interesting phrase.
Joey, what do you think they're going to hide? What's your suspicion here? Because you're just pointing to something in the paper, in the letter.
There's some good news and bad news. For people who want more transparency, the bad news is this phrase, peripheral third parties, because the Attorney General thinks that people who are somehow kind of on the fringe of this investigation shouldn't have their reputations damaged. But who do we count as on the fringe? Is it Jared Kushner? Is it Donald Trump Jr.? A lot of people would consider them very central in the cast of characters. The good news, however, is the line that he says that there are no plans to let the White House review this for privilege, because he has taken the president's public comments to say that it's all in Barr's hands to mean that literally. So I think we can take some assurances that what we read, if it's much of anything, at least has not been scrubbed by the White House, but it has been scrubbed or put together under Barr, who believes very strongly in this.
We are a skeptical people in this country, and I'm glad we are, Barbara. But here's the question. If you start saying individual one and that kind of legalese, and you refer to somebody meeting at Trump Tower in June of 2016, we're going to know who these people are. And you can redact their names up the kazoo, and we're going to be able to figure this out as we look at the context, I believe. Don't you think?
Well, yes, if only the names are redacted. But as we just saw recently in the redactions of the Michael Cohen search warrant, it could be that entire pages are redacted. And if that's the case, we won't have the context to be able to figure out what's going on. I think the congressman's suggestion is a really good place to start, which is to turn over the entire report to Congress, where we don't have those concerns about privacy interests and grand jury interests and classified information, with a court order, as we saw in the Watergate matter and other matters with special counsels. A court order can permit the disclosure of even grand jury information to Congress when it has an overriding interest to the secrecy protections of 6E. So I think that would be a very good place to start, and then maybe the public sees a redacted version of that.
Joey, do you think we're going to get
Chris,
something here? Go ahead, Congressman. You're right.
I was going to say one thing we have to really be careful about. In this letter, Barr seems to suggest somehow the president has deferred to him on the invocation of executive privilege. If by that he means he thinks he's going to get to look through the report and invoke executive privilege, he's sadly mistaken. He doesn't have the right to invoke that. That belongs to the executive. That belongs to the president. He needs to invoke it, and we should be very careful that he's not going to attempt to use that to scrub this report of a lot of damaging information.
Congressman, that's incredible. I know that law. It has to be the president who personally, as chief executive, seeks the executive privilege. Why wouldn't Barr know that? This is primitive information here. Wouldn't he know
Well,
that?
I think
that
he does
can't
know.
reserve the right for he doesn't have power of attorney here.
Right.
For presidents.
I think he does know that. I think he is acting in a way that he was hired to act. He's acting in a way to protect this president. He auditioned for this job. He committed to a certain view of the evidence before he was sworn in. And I think he's delivering on that, which is why I think we have to be very, very clear. The full report must be made available to Congress immediately.
Joanne, the big question there is what didn't he prosecute? What didn't he say was deserving of a charge? We know there was all kinds of meetings involving, all kinds of meetings involving Trump people with the Russians. What's stopped him from charging that as collusion or advancing a conspiracy by the Russians? Because he does say, we have to believe in this report, the Russians were conspiring to hurt our electoral process.
They said there were multiple efforts by the Russians, and they seem to know exactly how those efforts looked. And I think that's where a lot of these 400 pages go, I would expect. But the way Mueller defines it, because there is no statute for collusion, is he defines it as coordination and conspiracy. And I don't think it's that he just didn't turn over enough stones. You know, this was a very thorough investigation, 2,800 subpoenas, 22 months. He did not find evidence of that, and I think we should underline that. I think we should take some confidence.
But I would add to that. There are two issues here. One is whether crimes were committed. The other is whether there was wrongdoing. They're not always the same.
What would be wrongdoing to you?
Wrongdoing would be signaling to the Russians, we don't mind if you do something. We don't know what you're doing, but we'll have a meeting with you. You have dirt
In
for
fact,
us.
we'll deny you're doing it.
And then getting out in public when you know that they want to do something.
Congressman, I want to ask you, Congressman,
but just the interesting thing, I think half a point. What we're waiting to see is to what degree Mueller examined that and put those sort of findings in the report. So it's not just crime or no crime.
Okay.
Here's other wrongdoing.
Congressman, can you get on this and say what could be something that's really wrong, even impeachable, if not criminal?
Well, I think, if you watched Chairman Schiff go through the evidence, and he said it may not bother the Republicans that, members of the Trump campaign met with Russians, to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, that they delivered polling data, that they lied about that meeting. Those are all things which evidence certainly wrongdoing. It may not rise to the level of a crime that could be charged with and proved beyond a reasonable doubt. But this report, I expect, will detail lots of things that we would all condemn, want to prevent, discourage people from doing in terms of facilitating, encouraging, or not discouraging, or not reporting a foreign adversary attacking our democracy.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.